Welcome back to episode 18 of Global Maritime News, the podcast, bringing you the most impactful news reports and analysis across the global shipping and supply chain industry over the past half week. I'm Levine, your host, and as of Sunday, 17th of April, 2 p.m. Singapore time, these are the major stories. To begin, container lines avoid Shanghai as COVID-19 lockdowns continue. It especially affects specialized and refrigerated cargo as there is a lack of necessary equipment and storage space, as well as port congestion. Next, White House economists believe that supply chain hurdles will extend beyond the pandemic, and this was written about in the economic report of the president, published by the Council of Economic Advisors. Moving on, Sembcorp Marine secures its first contract for wind turbine installation vessel new builds for Maersk Supply Service. And this new generation of WTIVs will support the most modern next generation of wind turbines that have been scaled up. And later in the podcast, we understand why Vietnam plans to invest $1.5 billion in a new national shipping line. To begin with, the Chinese government has continued its zero COVID policy as the lockdown in Shanghai has continued beyond a few days and into its third week. Based on this, container lines have advised its customers to reroute away from Shanghai as the situation has not improved and to prevent further delays and damage to cargo. In an advisory to its customers, Ocean Network Express wrote that at Shanghai Port, trucking remains limited and terminals are still congested. ONE is not the only liner that is diverting from Shanghai, but Maersk also issued an advisory earlier this week that several of their vessels will be skipping Shanghai. This was attributed to the lack of available container storage space, especially for reefers and other specialized cargo. This has stopped some Brazilian meat exports to Shanghai, the typical main point of entry for Brazilian meat exports to mainland China, and instead the meat is being sent to Xinjiang and Ningbo, other major ports in China. Furthermore, there are an estimated more than 500 container ships currently anchored off China, waiting to be berthed according to Bloomberg. And with this development, there are worries that this latest lockdown could reduce container and vessel availability, driving up freight rates further and cause another disruption to the global supply chain. Next, the White House has released a report which shares the opinion that although the pandemic highlighted the weaknesses of the global supply chain, it did not create them. The report further warned that the issues will not disappear when the pandemic ends. The Council of Economic Advisors also wrote that despite the incredibly efficient supply chains in place around the world that have helped to decrease the cost of goods, they are incredibly vulnerable to breaking down when challenged by a pandemic, natural disaster, or conflict. The report elaborated further that the very nature of modern supply chains, characterized by outsourcing, offshoring, and a lack of resilience, have caused them to be incredibly complex and fragile. But that said, though resilience is important, by fortifying supply chains and making them more resilient, it could lead to more pressures on costs, as well as making more products more expensive and contributing to inflationary pressures. One of the White House economic advisors, Ms. Rouse, explained that while it did make some sense to increase domestic production of critical components like computer chips and perhaps even semiconductors, as seen in past supply shocks, the administration was not pushing to reverse offshoring completely. This is because that option is excessively costly and unnecessary. Instead, they recommend modest steps by the federal government, which include increased data sharing and encouraging domestic production of certain products that is vital for national security or core industries. Moving on, Sembcorp Marine achieves its first major milestone after its gradual transition to renewables and clean energy. They secured its first contract for wind turbine installation vessel new buildings. The company elaborated further on the deal and shared that it was for Maersk Supply Service and was completed after 2 years of intense collaboration, and that delivery is set for early 2025. In related news, Maersk Supply Service made its first investment in the promising offshore wind farm ship sector just last month. In March 2022, they announced that they plan to build a pioneering installation vessel for energy giants Equinor and BP to operate in the US market. As such, Sembcorp Marine will be building the required ships for this project. And according to a press release by the company, the new WTIV vessels that will be built is capable of operating a high level of efficiency that can handle the most modern, next generation of wind turbines that are scaled up in size. And they have longer, lighter rotor blades, taller towers, and multi-megawatt power generation. Elaborating further on the deal was Mr. Wong, Sembcorp Marine Rigs and Floaters Senior Vice President, who shared that the group is looking forward to execute this project and contribute to energy transition. The group has been working on transitioning to greener energy solutions since 2015, and with this contract, the company solidified its position in the renewable energy segment. And moving over to our final story for today is Vietnam's venture into creating a national shipping line. Mapped out by the Vietnam Logistics Business Association, the plan is to first develop a line for intra-Asia shipping operations before expanding worldwide. And though there have been numerous resolutions in the government in the past that have been proposed to create such a shipping line, none of them have progressed. As such, by having their own fleet of container ships with the shipping line, this would allow Vietnam to be less dependent on foreign shipping lines and have less exposure to variations in freight rates. This is important because Vietnam is heavily dependent on sea transportation, as close to 90% of all of the country's import and export volumes are transported by sea. In light of the sky-high freight rates charged by container shipping lines, one of the hardest-hit export industries has been wood. For Vietnam, the US is their largest export market, accounting for close to 60% of Vietnam's total wood exports with a value of close to $15 billion. As such, the high shipping costs due to the high freight rates have reduced the profits for this industry, a key component of Vietnam's export industry. The plan includes several phases, and the first phase would require a total investment of $1.5 billion and would focus on building the intra-Asia shipping services with routes to various countries, including China and India. Vietnam plans on using small to medium-sized container ships for this service. The second phase would be to build their national shipping capabilities, and they plan to go even further by mobilizing private capital from investors as they would begin participating in international routes. And that is all for now. If you want to comment on this podcast and some of the topics that we've covered, you can send us an email. The address is maritimenewspodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Global Maritime News. So once again, I'm Levine Tan, your host, and until next time, goodbye.